Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. Let's get right into it. I want to speak with canon lawyer Marc Balestrieri about the status of Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò and what a schism is, and maybe hit the canonical evidence about the antipope or pseudo-pope regarding Francis, originally from Buenos Aires. Lots to talk about. This is something of interest to people outside the Catholic Church as well, because it goes to global geopolitics and the difference between true justice and the best we can hope for here in this life, both civil and canonical. This episode brought to you by MyPillow. I'm very gung-ho about Mike Lindell. I've interviewed Mike 3 times. I love their products. It's not just pillows. It's not just sheets. It's towels. It's bathrobes. It's doggy beds. My dog Scout sleeps on a MyPillow bed. It's slippers. It's everything. Go to mypillow.com. My name, Patrick, at the checkout. That's the coupon code Patrick. Gets you a 66% discount for Patrick Coffin Show listeners. So go to mypillow.com. It's all American made, money back guarantee. I love his products. I'm grateful to Mike for his stick-to-itiveness and his punch back twice as hard. So we're big MyPillow fans here at the Patrick Coffin Show. MyPillow.com. Patrick's the coupon at checkout. You're welcome in advance. I first met our guest today, Marc Balestrieri, at a party in Los Angeles in the previous millennium. I remember what I was wearing. I think I remember what you were wearing, Mark. I want to go through your background as a canonist. You have a licentiate in canon law from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. Mark has served on all kinds of dioceses at the Roman Rota level in the Vatican. He's worked in England, Los Angeles, France. He's been the defender of the bond, the auditor. He's taught canon law as well as an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas for the St. Paul Seminary in School of Divinity. He's also fluent in English, Italian, French, Spanish, Latin, proficient in German. Ja, das ist gut. Marc Balestrieri, welcome to the show.
Danke, Herr Coffin. Thank you very much, Patrick. And thank you very much for inviting me to your show. It's an honor.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. You and I have kept in very dim touch through the years. Do you remember the party in Los Angeles?
I remember very well.
Yeah, you were dressed. I was. I'm not proud. I was a crack whore. I'll just say it. I had white powder, and I remember you stood out because you were a survivor of the Titanic. You had a life preserver, RMS Titanic, and you were looking very posh, like you just come from the ballroom before you got onto the rescue boat. So that was a lot of fun.
It was white tie with tails, and it was a life buoy, if you will.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Titanic that was on there. So yes, we are survivors, Patrick.
We are true, and maybe one day we'll be thrivers. So Mark, I have so many questions about what canon law is. Maybe we can start by opening the aperture up and talk about how different the 1983 code, because it's the one that governs the Catholic Church now in terms of praxis and justice and court forum settings. The previous iteration of canon law was called the Pio Benedictine from 1917, correct? What was the 83 code upgrade like? What's the Cliff's Notes difference between how things were done pre-World War I and now after John Paul II?
So it could be summarized in 3 points. The new code of canon law is a reduction in the number of canons. It's meant to be more concise, more pithy, 1,752 canons. And the final canon is Lex Suprema Salus Animarum. The salvation of souls is the supreme law of the Church. So it's meant to be very pastoral, all things considered, whereas the Pio Benedictine Code, promulgated in 1917, is much more detailed. By way of an example, the definition of a crime or delict is not found in the new Code of Canon Law, but it is defined in the Pio Benedictine Code. So the current code is meant to be more of a skeleton argument, only to have that which is necessary, whereas the Pio Benedictine of 1917 is much more detailed, which is helpful for canonists because it does avoid some controversies which otherwise wouldn't exist as they do in the new code.
People who've watched my show for long enough know that I wrote a book about Humanae Vitae called The Contraception Deception, and I compare the phrasing and the tone and the manner of teaching of Paul VI in Humanae Vitae from 1968 with the manner and tone and content of Pope Pius XI in 1930 with Casti Connubii. It's the same basic subject matter, love, sex, and marriage and contraception, but the language is so much more muscular and clear and kind of thunderous from 1930 compared to 1968. Is there some dim analogy there between the 1917 and 83? Kind of not contradicting, but much softer, much more wearing a cardigan instead of a leather jacket, if that makes sense.
Sure. So Cassius Canubi was quite clear and decisive when it came to the matter of teaching of the Catholic Church regarding marriage, regarding what was permitted and not permitted. Whereas Humanae Vitae, one can say, it almost never happened. That wasn't the case with Pius XI. Paul VI was brave in issuing Humanae Vitae, and yet at the same time, there was far more modern wording, if you will, in Humanae Vitae than would be found in Cassius Canubi. The definition, the title alone of Cassius Canubi, of chaste, casti, right? Whereas Humanae Vitae talks about humanity. That is emblematic of the real difference between Paul VI's reign and Pius XI's, one could say, especially when it comes to the pastoral treatment of modern concerns.
I wonder if another analogy between Humanae Vitae and canon law is that a law or set of laws are only as effective or good insofar as they're enforced. Paul VI basically did nothing to enforce Humanae Vitae. He didn't really rein in dissent at the seminary level. Public discussion and dissent was permitted almost ad nauseum. You had the Canadian bishops in September 1968 issuing their disastrous Winnipeg statement, silence from Rome. Is this something similar can be said about the 1983 code, that it's on the books, but will a bishop or a diocesan structure make it stick, give it teeth?
It's very interesting that you raised that question, Patrick, because the first concern is, what is Humanae Vitae's main teaching? Is it that artificial contraception is intrinsically evil, that it can never be implemented in practice? And if that is the teaching, what grade of teaching is it? Is it merely non-infallible authentic teaching according to Canon 752? Is it definitive infallible teaching according to Canon 750, paragraph 2? Or is it, on the contrary, revealed de fide divina et catholica teaching from which no Catholic could ever dissent or doubt? And so I'd say that many canonists, many theologians would interpret Humanae Vitae's main teaching, which is the teaching of the Catholic Church for 2 millennia, as being at least infallible and definitive, what's called de fide tenenda. However, John Paul II himself, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 1980s, he made an allocution where he said that the teaching of Humanae Vitae was part of the divine and revealed moral order. Those words are buzzwords for dogmatic teaching from which no Catholic can dissent. No, I say that because the penalty for dissent from a de fide tenenda teaching is a ferende sententiae penal process, if you will, as a penalty. There's no automatic penalty for dissenting from a merely infallible teaching. It's a grave sin. You cannot do so. Whereas if one dissents from a de fide divina et catholica teaching, pursuant to Canon 750, paragraph 1, then one incurs automatic lata sententia excommunication for heresy.
What's the difference between material heresy and formal heresy for people in the pew who have no canonical degrees like me?
So material heresy focuses on the matter of what a heresy is. And a heresy, pursuant to Canon 751, is defined as the pertinacious denial or doubt of a dogma of a teaching proposed by the Catholic Church officially as being of divine and Catholic faith. So first of all, you're talking about a proposition. It has a subject, it has a verb, and it has a predicate. It's a very strict interpretation. The second, so it's a point of doctrine. For instance, if one were to say Christ is not God, that is an heretical proposition. It becomes a crime of heresy when a baptized Catholic obstinately, pertinaciously externalizes that, knowing that it's against the teaching of the Church. And the teaching has to be against divine faith, which is that contained in sacred scripture or tradition, and the Catholic faith, which is when the Catholic Church proposes that proposition as being official teaching. Christ as God is contained both in sacred scripture and tradition and taught as such by the Catholic Church. Therefore, it's de fide divina catholica. In the case of Francis, there are a number of propositions which are problematic. But to round out the answer to your question, material heresy prescinds from the question of the state of mind, the mens rea, what's called canonically subjective imputability on the part of the Catholic who would manifest externally that proposition. The Church doesn't judge what is internal, only what's externalized.
I'm going to include in the show notes I believe, 2018 letter that was signed by scholars such as Father Aidan Nichols, whom I had the pleasure of meeting here in Southern California.
Right.
That is a very, very detailed account of at a bare minimum, the material heresies that we've been subjected to since March 2013. So I'll link that, and people can come to their own conclusions. Mark, do you think that His Eminence Mueller he's got the right what's the word? The right target, but he's accurate in the content, but he's shooting blanks because he won't say that Francis is a formal heretic, because that would suggest that he's ejectable from the office. It sounds like he's not quite willing to finish the deal or sign on the line which is dotted and call it formal.
I have the highest respect for Cardinal Mueller. He was prefect of the dicastery of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He's an eminent theologian in all, not just in cardinal name. He was chosen by Pope Benedict, and is really quite a good man. At the same time, and I wouldn't venture to say that he's a consequentialist, that he's afraid of saying formal heresy due to the circumstances. There are 5 opinions out there pursuant to Robert Bellarmine's book, De Controversies on the Roman Pontiff, which English translation has recently been published by Ryan Grant, a decent translation. And the first one would be by Albert Piguet, who died in 1542. The Pope can never become a heretic and can never therefore be deposed. That is said by Robert Bellarmine as being a, quote, probable opinion. Yes? And just so we understand, a probable opinion in Catholic moral theology is when something is not morally certain, but probable, and therefore safe to adhere to. And this is necessary to answer your question regarding Cardinal Mueller and the question of formal heresy. Then you have Cardinal Torquemada, who said that a pope who commits heresy, even interiorly, is deposed ipso facto by God. Robert Bellarmine says that that is completely false. The third opinion referenced by Bellarmine is that, treated by Torquemada, a pope neither by occult or hidden heresy, nor by manifest heresy, loses the papal office or can be deposed. He calls that sane valide improbabilis, especially, or he actually says evidently, ovviamente, highly improbable. Does that opinion sound familiar, Patrick? Has anyone said recently that the Pope, even if he were a heretic, cannot be deposed?
Well, yeah, we hear this a lot in the stratosphere. And is it not true that there is no canonical provision for ejecting a pope based on a formal heresy?
Not at all.
No mechanism, right?
You have, I believe you have Gianfranco Ghirlanda, the famous Jesuit, the Pope's canonist, if you will, Francis's canonist, who wrote an entire article in 2013, Cessazione dall'ufficio di Romano Pontefice, on the cessation of the office of Roman Pontiff. Ejectin is not technically the word used in the Code of Canon Law. That is more descriptive than technical. But you have the question of death, abdication, resignation, insanity, for instance, and so forth, incapacity. And Professor Ghirlanda, I believe it's Cardinal Ghirlanda now, does say that one who commits heresy would, by that fact, lose papal office. So this is the common doctrine of the Church, where Francis's own canonist, Cardinal Ghirlanda, asserts such. This is common doctrine. What you have, on the other hand, is the position that I just referenced by Bellarmine, the third opinion in the matter, which is currently advanced by Bishop Athanasius Schneider. That is where we heard it recently, and yet Cardinal Bellarmine, Doctor of the Church, qualifies that as being highly improbable. I would like to know what authors His Excellency Bishop Schneider calls to mind in contrasting with Cardinal Bellarmine's treatment of this third opinion. The fourth opinion by Cajetan is that one who commits heresy as Pope needs to be deposed formally by the Church and is not deposed ipso facto. But the fifth opinion, the one that Bellarmine calls, quote, opinio vera, the true opinion, is that a Pope who becomes a manifest heretic per se, ipso facto, ceases to be Pope and head of the Catholic Church. Just as he ceases to be a Christian, no Christian, one who's not a Christian cannot be the head of a church. So it's a matter of equality before the law. If you, Patrick, commit heresy, you're automatically lato sententia excommunicated. No need for a judgment. However, some would say that if, for instance, Francis or other popes were to commit heresy, they cannot be deposed. It's a question of a fundamental criterion of one being Catholic. One cannot be a Catholic and a heretic at the same time, and not Pope at the same time.
When here we come to the dilemma. If you're sitting across the table from Francis and you say, well, you know what? It's been verified that you have committed heresy, therefore you've lost your office. I can imagine him laughing ruefully, basically saying, make me. So then what? So the whole world thinks he's a heretic, and he doesn't go anywhere. He continues to do what he's doing and say what he's saying. Then what?
There is no precedent for that kind of fact pattern, Patrick. Archbishop Viganò has publicly stated that, if I'm not mistaken, he called upon the Swiss Guards to be activated to remove Pope Francis. Again, that is a question which is open. You referenced the term Francis has committed heresy. That implies that Francis is guilty of formal heresy, as opposed to Francis having committed material heresy or asserted an heretical proposition. It's more technical, and it leaves open the question as to whether he had a state of malice aforethought, which is what is required to prove formal heresy. Those are open questions.
Okay, let me in real time give you my miniature case on why I think he could be deemed guilty of formal heresy. It has to do with Amoris Letizia, section 8 with the footnotes. For 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has taught at the highest level, based on 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and chapter 11, fathers of the church, doctors who have applied themselves to this question, that divorced and civilly remarried Catholics, without a decree of nullity, may not receive Holy Communion. The reason we know that Amoris Letizia contradicts that teaching and that sacred tradition is that the Argentine bishops wrote a letter, a dubia, asking him to explain, hey, this is layman's terms, are you creating a loophole here where there would be some conditions where civilly divorced and remarried Catholics may be permitted to receive Holy Communion? And Francis's response to that was, this is the only permitted interpretation, and that dubia letter was promptly installed, or I'm not sure what the correct word is, promulgated in the Acta Apostolica Sedis, the AAS, the official vault or repository of Catholic teaching. Now, that I don't think you can square that circle. I'm not sure why that doesn't rise above the level of material and enter into formal heresy. What's wrong with my case?
So the question of formal heresy is a question of pertinacity, especially, according to canonists such as Ciprotti and Common Doctrine.
Pertinacity, you mean like stubborn refusal to change?
Pertinacity implies that one knows sufficiently what the teaching of the church is, and still afterwards willfully denies or doubts that teaching. Right? Heresy is either a denial, a strict contradiction, or a doubt. Maybe there is no life after death. No one's ever come back after death. Things like that. Those are heresies. No? So the question regarding formal heresy is, what proof do you have, arguendo, Patrick, that Francis actually knows the teaching of the church as being the true teaching and then dissented from that, as opposed to Francis promulgating a correction of what he holds to be a wrong doctrine? At the same time, the rebuttal to that would be that heretics always assert heresies thinking that they know better. The question here is, what is the true teaching of the church? What is the degree in which that prior teaching was promulgated? Was it merely proposed as an authentic, non-infallible teaching, non-dogmatic, that can be changed? Or was it, to the contrary, a dogmatic teaching de fide divina et catholica, that no one in the state of grave sin can accede to Holy Communion? I believe that Cardinal Burke has recently published a new book treating that specific question, and it would seem that the teaching is based on what the Apostle Paul says in the Gospels, right, in the sacred scriptures, regarding one better being in a state of grace and receiving Holy Communion or else.
If you're listening to this conversation with canon lawyer Marc Balestrieri, maybe your pastor has been disciplined, maybe you know someone who's come under fire for canonical censure or is in need of an articulate canon lawyer. How can people connect with you, Marc? What's your website, and how can folks get in touch with you?
Thank you for asking, Patrick. It's www.canonicalaid.org, and there is a contact page from which one can telephone the receptionist or make a submission and upload correspondence documents that are pertinent through that contact page on the website, and you'll receive an answer very rapidly within 24 hours. If there's an urgent need for assistance, mention urgent and describe the need on the submission form.
Excellent. Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. I very much appreciate your time. Thanks for your good work. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. God loves us, and there's nothing we can do about it, so be a saint. What else is there?